Welcome to the NCDWI Guy podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI Guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 146 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, I have my good friend and business coach, Ali Ghaffari, on the podcast. This episode is going to change your business. If you apply the principles in this episode to your life, it is going to change your life for the better, and it is going to change your law firm for the better as well. Ali is an executive coach. That's how I came into contact with him. He's been doing that now for a number of years. He is a former member of the United States Navy, was a fighter pilot, just flying in the skies, Ali was, and officer in the Navy before ending his career teaching leadership at the Naval Academy to midshipmen. And it's this leadership element that we're really focusing on today. That is where we are kind of concentrating. Today's conversation is on the value of leadership. John Maxwell, one of my favorite people when it comes to leadership mindset, said, "A successful person finds the right place for himself, but a successful leader finds the right place for others." A successful person finds the right place for himself, but a successful leader finds the right place for others. In today's episode, the conversation that Ali and I have about leadership is going to impact the way that you interact with anybody else at your firm. If you have an associate, if you have a partner, if you have a paralegal, if you have a receptionist, it's going to impact the way that you interact with them. It's going to interact the way that you interact with potential and retained clients, with your clients. How are you leading your clients? And it's going to have an impact on your reputation in the community, in the courtroom. This is not something that is kind of in addition to being a good lawyer. You really cannot be a good lawyer without being a good leader. The two are symbiotic in terms of how they interact with one another. If you are a good leader, you are going to be a better lawyer. It's just the case. And so I'm really excited about this conversation on leadership. And also excited to announce Ali will be speaking at the Freedom Fighter Summit in October, October 19th and 20th in Asheville. This is going to be an incredible event. Again, I've talked about this a number of times on recent episodes, but it really things are really coming together for this conference, and I just could not be more excited about the group of people that are going to be at that conference, the group of attorneys that are going to be at that conference, the lineup of speakers, the energy that's going to be present in building up one another's law practices. I'm just extremely excited about sharing that opportunity with anybody that is planning to make it. So very much excited to have Ali talking there on leadership. And I think that today's episode will give you a little bit of a forecast of the value that is going to be coming down the pike in October from Ali when it comes to leadership strategies and tactics. So hope you enjoy today's episode as much as I enjoyed the conversation with Ali. Ali, it's going to be a fun time talking with you today. You've become a very close friend over the past few months that we've been working together, and obviously done a lot of great things in my life, both personally and professionally. So I am very humbled and grateful to have this conversation with you. Looking forward to it.
Me too. It's a privilege to be here and to be on your show.
Well, I think, kind of diving right into the heart of today's episode, which is really kind of on leadership. If you could just kind of give a brief background in terms of your time in the military and kind of how leadership has kind of played a role in both your military career, but now also in kind of post-military work that you're doing.
Okay, sure. So I did 20 years in the military. I retired about a year and a half ago. And my career was flying F-18s, and I was in a number of squadrons, and I was an admiral's aide for a time, an instructor pilot. And then my final 5 years or so was at the Naval Academy, where I taught leadership to midshipmen. And then I was essentially a leadership coach and consultant to faculty, staff, and coaches to help them become better leaders. But the idea that leadership was an important thing it wasn't something I started off with. It was something that I just paid lip service to, and the phrase that I had in the back of my head when I was a junior officer about probably 5 to 8 years in was, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I had that rattling around in my head, but I just paid lip service to it. I didn't really see the value of it. And so to me, what that meant was, hey, I meet with all of my sailors once and just get to know them briefly. And then I'm a good leader at that point in time, right? And hey, what's wrong? How can I help you? And so the result of that in that particular instance was I got a refrigerator for them in their shop downstairs. And I felt like, hey, I've got this. I'm a good leader. I've got this wired. And then, this came, to maturity later on in my career, where I really hit the wall and really needed to have some very strong leadership skills, which I didn't have at the time, and fell flat on my face. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But the idea that leadership was important didn't occur to me until I failed at it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's so interesting, because I feel like all branches of the military really spend a lot of time on leadership. I think when most of us think of, whether it's maybe a little bit higher level for officer training, but I think when most people that have never had any experience in the military think about like boot camp, it's like, okay, you do a lot of like marching and running, crazy obstacle things, and then you learn how to shoot a gun, and that's basically what the focus is. And I think even from a lot of the kind of the lowest ranking members of the military are getting leadership lessons and discipline lessons kind of right from the get-go. And I was looking at this quote yesterday from General Eisenhower: "The one quality that can be developed by studious reflection and practice is the leadership of men." So it was interesting. I don't know if I agree that's the only quality that can be developed, but certainly in terms of that being like a focal point or kind of, just that has primacy, and that can be taught. It's not, you think of this idea of natural born leaders, people that were just born to lead. And so if you've got it, great. If you don't, you're screwed, like, in terms of being an officer. And I don't see that as the way that the military approaches things. It's very much about like, how can we develop somebody's leadership capabilities and abilities. So I guess, just in terms of your experience, why is leadership so important? I mean, again, that sounds like maybe a basic question, but why do you think there's so much emphasis on that in the military?
Yeah, I mean, we can just talk generally speaking, and then we'll talk military, and it'll be obvious at that point in time. But leadership, we're always leading. Anytime you have two people together, one person is leading the other person frequently. And leadership is all about relationships. It's about trust in a relationship. And if I'm a parent, I'm a leader. I'm leading my children. If I am working in an office, there's generally someone who's leading me, and there's someone I'm leading frequently. And in many situations where you're in a group of friends, there's generally someone who emerges as a leader and has most influence there. And so we're using these leadership skills at all times. We may or may not be using them well, but we have them. And why does that matter in the military? Well, it matters a great deal in the military. And because if if my leader doesn't know what they're doing, if they're not a good leader, if I don't trust them, then I'm not going to put my life on the line for them. If I feel like they're out for their own benefit, if they're not taking into consideration what's best for me, what's best to accomplish the mission, if they're not doing things in an ethical manner, they get less and less out of me. And in the military, the consequences for that are life and death for a lot of people. And so a military leader is in charge of manning, training, equipping their units. So if they don't have the right people in the right spots, that they haven't given them the right equipment or the right training, people are going to die as a result of that. And so it's very important to the people in the military that they have good leaders and that they develop themselves and to become good leaders. But it doesn't mean that every leader in the military is a good leader. It's just that they ought to be, because the stakes are so high.
Yeah. I think that's why in business, there are so many analogies to the military, because the stakes are so high. And so you kind of like take these examples where, again, there's really nothing more significant on the line than a person's life, whether that's yours or, one of your brothers or sisters in battle. And so it's just such a easy analogy, I think, for people to connect to, but that is the same in the world of business. As soon as your colleagues or people that you're responsible for supervising start thinking, well, he's only looking out for himself, so I'm not on board with the mission. I'm going to try to take care of my own. It really becomes this very what we think of as like toxic work environment, that everybody is kind of out for their own skin. So in terms of, some of the ways that you've seen this, kind of leadership mentality in the civilian world, what has that kind of looked like from, either your kind of business coaching experience or, personally from kind of leading the school that you're in charge of, or other walks of civilian life?
Yeah, I've seen a number of very obvious mistakes. One of the biggest things in order to be a good leader, you need self-awareness. And I've coached and interacted with a number of folks who lack self-awareness, and that's one thing. Or if you're not aware that you're selfish, or that you're not focused on your folks, then you don't have a chance or a prayer of being a good leader, because it's all about you. It's all about yourself. And leadership is not about you. It's not about yourself. And that's the point of leadership. It's about something greater than yourself. It's about other people. So there's an element of self-awareness. There's also an element of being good at what you do, and being excellent at that. And I've had leaders who are fantastic at what they did, and they got a lot more out of me. And I have worked for folks who are incompetent, and they got less out of me because I didn't want to follow them, because I'm going into danger, right? I don't trust you to know what you're talking about, to know what you're doing. And so in business, I would say, having the awareness, focusing on others, focusing on the mission, what's the best thing for everybody here, not what's best for me, and being really good at what you do are critical for success in your organization. Clearly, there's more to that, but those are some of the things that I found in my coaching career and in my military career.
In terms of kind of developing leadership skills, you're kind of talking earlier about how that was more kind of like finding by mistake, right? Like I'm almost stumbling upon that. At what point was there this kind of moment where it's like, leadership is important? I mean, it's a big part of what I'm responsible for.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about at the Naval Academy when we're teaching leadership is we talk about the great man theory, right? You're born to be leaders. You mentioned early on. Is that true? I mean, that was the fad, I think, in the 1900s. But it's absolutely completely false. You can be born with characteristics that help you be a better leader, like being outgoing, well-spoken. Some of those things that people just naturally are, those certainly help. But if you lack some other very critical things, then you're not going to be a great leader. If you don't care about other people, if you're not a trustworthy human being, if you haven't developed your virtue, those things will very, very much inhibit your ability to lead. For me, in my particular case, I had the benefit of, I was working as an admiral's aide for a phenomenal admiral, Bill Sizemore, who was the commanding officer at Top Gun. He was a commander of an air group. He had done everything you'd ever want to do as a leader in the Navy, or just as a pilot. And I respected him a great deal. And as his aide, I had this privileged place to be able to be in some of his meetings where he was making decisions. And the thing that struck me most in our meetings is he'd have the JAG there, the Judge Advocate General. He'd have the public affairs officer. He'd have the chief of staff. He'd have me, and then he'd have whatever decision he was going to make. And he'd hear from everyone's perspective about the facts of the case, and then he would say, "What's the right thing to do here?" It wasn't what is the legal thing to do here, right? That's the bare minimum. It wasn't what's going to look the best in the press. That's what the PAO cares about. But at the end of the day, it was what is the right thing to do here? And that's a much higher level. And as a result of that care for doing the right thing by the organization, by the people involved, by the Navy, those was harder answers to questions to answer. But I had a great deal of respect for him for doing that. And so I learned a lot from him and how well he asked really good questions to get to the heart of the matter. He had this penetrating intellect, and I brought these things on board and absorbed these things, and I really wanted to implement them at my next duty station. So I showed up at my next duty station, realizing how important it was to connect with your boss and for the commanding officer to really know what's going on and have a good relationship. And I showed up to this squadron, which was very dysfunctional. There was a break. The commanding officer and executive officer did not see eye to eye with the junior officers, and the department heads were kind of stuck in the middle into no man's land. And it was really most of the officers against the commanding officer. And for me, I wanted to jump in and just heal this and fill this bridge right away. And without having established any sort of relationships with anyone or done anything. So I jumped in and was trying to be that mediator between one and the other, and failed. So the commanding officer, executive officer, they stiff arm me. They say, "Hey, you're not at our level. So you are below us. So you're be in your role." And the junior officers saw me as basically a turncoat, someone who was, kissing up to the commanding officer and executive officer. So before, even a month was out, I was, dead man standing in the squadron. And one of the things I learned as I reflected upon that experience was that I did not prioritize the building of relationships. And as I mentioned earlier, leadership is all about relationships. And I had not built a strong relationship with each of the junior officers. I had not built a strong relationship with the other department heads. And I had not built strong relationships with the commanding officer and executive officer. So I didn't have the knowledge, and I didn't have the trust. I didn't have all of these things that would have been beneficial for me had I, after establishing all those, still thought it was the right thing to do to bridge that gap between the two sides. I had nothing. Additionally, one of the things that I had thought in my head that was going to get me the respect and admiration of the others was to just do really good at my job, and to focus on that. But in the end of the day, that the statement that nobody cares, how much you know until they know how much you care, really rang true, because they didn't care how well I did my job. They didn't care, right, because they didn't know that I cared about them. And so that was the hard lesson that I learned. I went through basically 2 years where I was just miserable in that squadron, and then it took me several years beyond that to unpack all of that and to understand, hey, number one, relationships. You have to get to know people. You have to genuinely care about them. And then once that's established and you continue to do that, then you can do the things that you need to do as a leader.
Yeah, I love that. Going back to the kind of lesson of doing the right thing that you learned from your admiral, and kind of that, asking that question after everybody had kind of said their piece, so to speak, in terms of advising him on what to do, just putting that question back out there. What is the right thing to do in these circumstances? as you were saying that, I was looking for a quote that I thought was kind of on point. This is from Peter Drucker. He says that management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right thing. And that like is just such a wild thing, because I think most of us, when we think of leaders, well, not necessarily most of us, but a lot of people, when they think of leaders, think of managers, right? People that are kind of in charge of somebody else. And when you kind of simplify that definition to leadership is just doing the right thing, then it really does make everybody, again, instead of everybody kind of trying to protect themselves and kind of, being very, putting walls up or, trying to say the right things or kind of get the appropriate response to what you think they're looking for. Everybody's now able to be much more open in working together. If the ultimate goal is just to do the right thing, as opposed to having a good system, which good systems are great, but if that's where the end all be all is just in a good system, then it's just really hard, I think, for people to get behind that. Whereas when you're doing the right thing, it's really easy to get everybody else, not only on board with that, but excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would add, in addition to doing the right thing, having a good vision, and making a difference in the world and communicating why it is this thing that you're doing as a team matters, so that people feel like, that they're doing something worthy with their life, with their talents and abilities. They're bringing those to work every day in a way that's going to make a difference after they're gone. It's going to make a difference in the lives of the people that they're impacting. That's critical. And I would add a second thing too, is that as a leader, you've set your vision. You're doing the right things. And then as you're getting to know these people who are working for you and you're building trust with them, understanding what it is that they love to do, what drives them, what their strengths are, and their abilities, what they don't like, and then putting them in an area to succeed and just get out of their way. Just put them in that place where they can just shine the thing that they do that they're world class at. And just get out of the way, supply them. Hey, what do you need? How can I help keeping you, keep bringing ammo boxes to you and just keep shooting, those bullets that only you can shoot, and just get out of their way. And just great things happen at that point in time. So leadership is not hard, but you just have to do a few things right.
Yeah. I feel like even in terms of the trust aspect, it's one of the, focusing on doing the right thing and building a relationship is important in every consultation that we have with a client. Every time a new person comes in and sits down to talk with us, that's it's kind of a two-way interview that is going on, but mostly for the client to be interviewing the attorney. Is this the person that I want, representing me, fighting for me, advocating for me in the courtroom? And for a lot of DWI clients, which is what we focus on, and obviously that's where kind of our audience is focused. These are a lot of times people that have never been in trouble before, that they've never had to use a criminal defense lawyer, so they have this kind of model of criminal defense lawyer in their head, which is this is a person that is trying to kind of break the rules, figure out a loophole to kind of, get somebody off the hook, is sleazy, is a shark. Like that's, kind of the, a lot of people's thought about what somebody in that arena is, even if they're the one that is kind of like charged with, or facing those type of charges. And so I think that in the consultation, the more obviously the consultation is the first opportunity to really be building one-on-one trust with the client. The more that you're showcasing, I care about you as a person, and my goal is to get the best possible outcome. We're going to do that by doing things the right way. We're going to do the right thing along the way. Again, even if you're not sugarcoating everything or you're, it's not all good news. If people walk away from that meeting thinking that guy or that gal has my best interest at heart, it is such a more positive, experience for them, and much more likely to retain you as a lawyer, much more likely to trust in your kind of leadership, or counsel down the road in terms of how we should be proceeding forward with the case, because there's not this now roadblock of, does he just care about my wallet? He's talking about my family. He's talking about the impact that this is having outside of the courtroom. All of those things allow for, again, that relationship building.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. So if I'm coming in to see you and I've made a mistake, I've had a DUI or whatnot, you're the leader, like you're the expert in what happens now. And so I'm relying on you. I'm looking to you to lead me. And you're setting the tone in that relationship. And I want to be able to trust you, and I want to be able to rely on you and understand that what you say is true, and that what you think is going to happen will likely happen, and that you're doing things the right way. Because if you start indicating that you're not doing those things, say, hey, well, this is the way it ought to be doing, we're going to do it this way. You start giving signals and signs that you're not squaring the corners, that you're not doing things the right way. That erodes my trust, because I know, okay, if you're willing to do that in this situation, there's nothing saying that you're not willing to do that with my billing, right? You're going to
exactly
charge in on me. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. Or if there's something that benefits you, that's not going to benefit me, you're going to be out for yourself as well. And so there's more to it than just doing the right thing because it's the right thing. It's actually better quality service for your clients to do the right thing. And if I trust you and if I think you're going to do the right by me, I'm going to accept the fact. We say, hey, this is our goal. This is what we're going to do. These are things that may happen. We can't do this. I need to do this. And if you give it to me straight, the good news and the bad news, I'll be more willing to accept that, knowing that you care about me and that you're looking out for my best interest and that you're giving me everything you can and that I trust you. And I say, okay, that I know that you're giving me your best and let's just do what we can. So absolutely, I can't echo what you said enough, is the critical importance of being upstanding, squaring the corners, doing the right thing with regard to your client. Because if you do it the wrong way and you win the case, you may still have lost the client and future clients as well, right?
Yeah, or lost relationship with the district attorney or with the judge. I mean, it only takes one time of making that poor ethical choice, and that's how you're remembered. Even if you're doing it the right way, the right thing for years after that, it's really hard to recover that trust that is lost in those poor decisions. And again, all of that buildup in the courtroom with the DA, with the client, is ultimately serving your client, because now the judge can better trust what is being presented by you in argument, or order that you're asking them to sign, that this is all squared away. I know this person, and they are concerned about doing things the right way. So there's just so much of that like outward reputation that really is critical to being able to serve your client well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going in many ways the extra mile. It takes longer to really get to know your client, to understand them, to seek to try to figure out who they are and to build a relationship. It takes more to go, do the right thing to square that corner. But that's what separates you from the other folks. That's your quality. That's your reputation. Those are critical importance, critical ingredients in being a fantastic leader, fantastic attorney. And it's worth every ounce of energy that you're putting into building those relationships and doing the right thing. So I can't emphasize that enough.
Once you had kind of, moved from officer position into kind of more of a teaching role at the Naval Academy in kind of specifically a leadership model. Talk a little bit about kind of what that program looked like, and what specific lessons were being emphasized. Obviously, there's probably too much to go over today, but just the big picture, kind of what was kind of your maybe personal emphasis in terms of how to convey some of these leadership lessons to young men.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I showed up to the Naval Academy and they told me I'd be teaching leadership, I really felt like I shouldn't be teaching leadership. I felt like a fraud. Like I just failed as a leader, and you want me to teach leadership to the next generation of officers. But it's true that you really learn something when you have to teach it.
Yes.
In the case of the Naval Academy, they teach they call them plebes, but they're freshmen. They teach them leadership and followership, and that's focused on this relationship between the leader and the follower and the importance of trust. And they hit a number of different topics of self-awareness. Who am I? What is my personality? How do I best lead? An element of servant leadership they tackle as well. And then their sophomore year, they go into basically morality and ethics, ethical leadership. What is it to be an ethical leader? Because if you ask the question, what makes us different than a terrorist? The only answer, because they say is someone's terrorist, another person's freedom fighter. The reality is it's our moral choices on the battlefield. That's what separates us from the enemy, is the decision not to kill innocent people, the decision not to contravene these just war expectations of how a war ought to be fought, not to massacre people, to avoid genocide. All of these things to defend ourselves, but not to attack people who haven't attacked us. And so it's important that our upcoming officers have an understanding of the history of that. So we go into St. Thomas Aquinas, and we go into the history of philosophers. We go through utilitarianism and natural law and a whole number of different systems of understanding of ethics, situational ethics and whatnot. And we do trolley problems where, if you get I'm not sure if you talked about it you get a fat man who is strapped down on the railroad. And what do? Do you flip the switch and kill 3 innocent people, or do you not, and you let them die, or whatever it is? We go through those. Those are a lot of fun. And then their junior year, they go into organizational leadership and what does power look like? In a good sense, like how do you accumulate power and authority? And one of those things we talked about was expertise, having expert knowledge about something. People look up to you, having a that's relational power. And there are a number of different ways to accumulate that respect and that ability to get things done. And at the end of the day, that's what leadership is. Leadership is doing more than would otherwise happen as a result of your relationship with somebody else, with a follower who is going to carry out this thing that needs to be done, getting more than the bare minimum out of them, and accomplishing something great, ultimately, together. And so having taught this course on leadership, the freshman course, and learning about leadership as relationships, and then studying this, I was just eager to get an opportunity to practice this. I want to be able to do this. And so I was able to go on a Knowles course, an outdoor leadership course, with other faculty and staff, and I was the leader on that course. And that was the first time I experienced good leadership. And what did that look like? It looked like projecting ahead. What were the needs ahead? What's coming up ahead? How do we prepare for those things? It looked looking behind. What are the mistakes we made? What are the things that we did well? Who do we need to compliment? Say, hey, great job. Who do we need to talk to about saying, hey, what if we think about doing this differently? What are the gaps right now? What are we missing? Who's not making their food when they need to? Who needs this? Who needs that? And it's just caring for all of your people. And that by nature is exhausting, but it feels good when you're doing it. And it feels good when you're done, because I nailed that. I did that right. And so for a week out in the wilderness in Utah, I was that leader that I wanted to be, and that I had studied about. And that's the thing I want to bring back. An earlier question you talked about is, are leaders made? Are they born? They learn. You can learn in a classroom. You can learn by reading books. You can learn by watching others. But then you also have to practice.
Yes.
And it's the combination of both of those things, the learning and the doing. It's like just going to law school and then not practicing law. I mean, you've got that academic knowledge, but it doesn't make you a good attorney. But if you just were thrown into the courtroom, you'd be a terrible attorney too. You're just you're flying by the seat of your pants. But you need both of those things together. And then, it makes those lessons that you learn. You don't have to learn all the lessons because you understood some of them academically. And then the ones that you do learn, the hard knocks lessons, you're able to capitalize on those from the basis of your knowledge, your foundation, and then you learn more rapidly. And so you have to have the experience and the knowledge, and then obviously your personal characteristics are beneficial as well. But living that life of virtue, in particular, being a virtuous human being,
Yes,
I think it's probably the most beneficial thing to leadership, because, as we said, trust is critical.
yeah. I mean, I think that's so amazing in terms of that combination of classroom and practical experience. And I think until you really start to think through ethical dilemmas, there are ethical dilemmas that we can forecast, and I would say particularly on, in the courtroom. I mean, we have, ethics courses that we're required to go through in law school. We've got the ethical rules of conduct, professional rules of conduct that we're required to kind of live by in terms of our practice. So you have that, that theory that you've spent some time thinking about and working through in law school. But then I think every lawyer has that also in their particular practice area. Everything is so general in law school, and a lot of the examples that might come up might not really apply in your particular circumstance. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about the ethical rules in law school is that they almost always focus on, here's what bad behavior looks like. Here's where the bar is, and if you're below that bar, there's going to be problems. So, make sure that you hit the bar. And there's very little time. And I mean, there's just not really enough probably time to kind of get too deep into this, but I think there's very little time on what would extremely ethical behavior look like, or what would kind of like the model lawyer be doing under these circumstances. Not just like where is the line drawn that, beyond that you could lose your license to practice, but what does it look like to be a truly great lawyer in terms of doing the right thing. But then, like you also said, the practice side of things, when you get into the courtroom, it's so easy to know the right thing to do. And then all of a sudden you're standing in the courtroom and your client shares something. It's like, gosh, I really need to kind of disclose that, or what should I do now that I have this particular piece of information? And now it becomes, again, it's in real time, and it's got to be carried out into the world. And so the more you can kind of follow those small steps of making good choices and doing the right thing and disclosing information that you need to disclose, the easier it will be when those kind of like real moments of truth come up of, am I going to kind of live by the code that I've signed on to, or am I going to cut a corner? Because, and there's all kinds of excuses that we can make up in those moments that really are kind of a dilemma point. So that practice really is huge in trying to kind of move into good leadership.
Yeah, I love what you just said there, because it dovetails nicely with what we teach the midshipmen at the Naval Academy. And that is, virtue is a habit. It is our choice of habits and how we choose to live our lives. And if you make good decisions, it's going to strengthen your virtue. If you make bad decisions, it's going to weaken your virtue. And those times when you're on the spot, and something is needed right away and you don't have time to think through it and you just have to react, you're going to default to that thing that you do most often. And so if you've made a lot of small decisions that are all, courageous, and then a moment of testing, you need to be courageous, you need to defend someone, you need to stick up for someone, whatever it is, put your life on the line, you're going to do that without a second thought. If, however, you've been a coward in small ways, and not said something, not stood up, not done anything, when you're, tested, you're going to be a coward. That's just the way it's going to be. And so building that virtue of choosing the right habits, to be honest, to act with integrity, to be courageous, to be okay to lose a case. I will lose a case, but I'm not, if the facts and everything, I just can't win this case given the cards I'm dealt. If there's some admission that's going to torpedo the case, hey, it is what it is. At least we played fairly, and we did what we could. We did the best thing we could with the cards that we had in our hands, rather than trying to pull some sort of trick or some dishonest move and win a case. if you're doing the right thing consistently, it'll come naturally, and that's you'll be a man or a woman of virtue, and you'll be someone worth honoring, and someone worth admiring, and someone worth representing other people, because you've built yourself up in that way.
Yeah, there's a prayer that I say regularly to St. Thomas More that talks about asking for the grace that today I shall not to win a point lose my soul. And I think that, again, that there's this call within that prayer to be a zealous advocate and to go to the library and study. So again, it's not as though you're not going to absolute war on your client's behalf, but having your priorities in the right place is really important. And again, I think it's something that if we're not regularly working on, if we're not working on developing virtue, working on our leadership skills, it can be something that just kind of gets lost in the jumble. And I think that is where we've kind of lost in terms of criminal defense lawyers specifically, a little piece of who we are. We've kind of moved from the Atticus Finch, of visual into, this, kind of shark, sleazeball kind of thought process that, this is just going to be somebody that does anything to kind of rob justice from happening, as opposed to somebody that is really trying to go to war for the Constitution and for justice. And I think that's the kind of mindset that I think we as lawyers really need to bring, criminal defense lawyers need to bring, is how can we be, viewed as freedom fighters as opposed to the terrorists in the courtroom? Because I think that's the model that we've kind of, have right now. And I think some of that is deserved, some of it is not. But unfortunately, that's the model that most people have when they think about a criminal defense lawyer. And the only way to change that is to really have your priorities, in absolute place when you're walking into the courtroom.
Yeah, I often find if you project yourself out on your deathbed, when you're trying to make a decision, and look back and say, will I be proud of this or will I not be? And what will matter when it's all done? I like to tell a story about my boss, Admiral Sizemore, to come back to him. He told me a story that his daughter was working at this Greasy Spoon little restaurant on base. And this young pilot was interested in going on a date with her. And he asked her out, and they're sitting down and they're talking. And then it just comes to him. He realizes, oh my gosh, this is the Admiral's daughter. I'm the Admiral's daughter. And he can't help himself. He said, do you realize how amazing your dad is? Like, your dad is so amazing. He's done everything there is to do in aviation. And Admiral Sizemore said, his daughter said, I don't care about all that. I just care that he's my dad and that he loves me. Bring this back to being an attorney. At the end of the day, on your deathbed, nobody's going to care what your record was, wins and losses. They're going to care, how was that person? What was their character? How did they make me feel? Did they care about me? Those are the things that people are going to care. Those are the things that are going to remain when you're gone. And so make those decisions that you have now with that end in mind, and you can't go wrong.
Well, maybe this will be kind of like a good question to end with, Ali. What do you think if somebody is interested in becoming a better leader? What is one thing that they could do to make that happen? And it could be something we've already talked about or something new, but what do you think they could do to advance their leadership skills? Yeah,
absolutely. I think if you're a leader now, and you feel like, hey, I need to be better, there are a few things you could do. So first is really get to know your employees. And not in a way like a professional way, in a way that about their family and what's going on, where they're from, their pets' names, what their kids are doing. And that way, just really seek to understand them and build a relationship with them where they see you less like just this unreachable boss and more like a friend. And you're going to get more out of that person as a nice byproduct of it, but you'll also appreciate your time with them as well. So building and enriching those relationships around you, particularly in the workplace, but obviously your family. And then also asking them and getting feedback. So there are a couple of questions you can ask them. Hey, what's one thing you would change if you were the boss? What would you do? Definitely. And people will tell you, they'll tell you, I would do this, I would do that. So you're going to get some feedback from them about how things can be improved. And then, hey, what feedback do you have for me? How can I be a better boss for you? And then acting on that and doing something about what their comments are, and then building that trust and continue to do that. That way you get that positive feedback. So you build the trust, get the feedback, and then they'll tell you what you need to do to be better. And then follow your conscience on these things. And I think you'll be in good stead.
I love those points. I particularly, I think it's because it's applicable to me. Love the feedback point, because I know that that's been one of the points of emphasis since day one. Is how do other people perceive you as a leader? When I'll come to you with a question about something that we're doing at the office, or project that we're focusing on, it's always, well, what do other people think about this? Have you asked them? And the answer is almost always no. But it's I mean, but that has been something that has really become more a part of my leadership style, and has had huge dividends, because again, I think it's so hard to get your mind around where other people in the organization are, even if you know them really well and you think that you've got it kind of all figured out. That just asking regularly for feedback is just such a helpful part of being a good leader.
Yeah, it's not a democracy. You're still the boss, but by getting their feedback and then accepting it, not being afraid of it. People.
Yes, I think that's part of it for a lot of people, is I should know all the answers, so I'm not going to ask about it. Right.
Exactly. And it's not an insult to you in any way if you get some constructive feedback. In fact, it's a gift. And so you have to get out of the mindset that this is going to hurt me. If someone tells me something that they don't like what's happening, or they have a different idea, it has nothing to do with you as a human being. It's just another idea about how to do something better. And honestly, none of us was born with all the brightest ideas in the world. We have to rely on each other to come up with these better ideas. So the more you solicit that feedback, and then you can choose to say no, but people appreciate the fact that they've had some buy-in, they've had a say in it, whether or not you accept their idea. The simple fact that you asked for it, pondered it, and then decided one way or another to go forward is basically checks that block for them. This person cares about me. My voice matters here. And now I'm even more engaged than I was before. So critical.
Yeah, I love it. Well, those are great points. And thanks so much for sharing all this information. I think if we can become better leaders, we really will change the reputation that defense lawyers have in our communities.
And every day is a new day. So if your track record has been spotty, tomorrow's a new day, and you can start afresh.
Amen. If you found the information in this podcast to be valuable, I simply ask that you pay it forward and share this podcast with another member of the legal community. Also, if you would leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening on, I would greatly appreciate it.